Hiya, welcome to Inside Property Development with me, Paul Higgs. And this is one of the weeks where we are answering people's questions. What are some of the biggest trends you're seeing in property design right now? So obviously when it comes to design, there's a couple of different aspects. There's obviously how things look and you know, sort of on the outside, well, and on the inside, but then also how things function. Yeah. So in terms of the, you know, how things actually work, how they function, a lot of that's really partly to do with buildability stuff in terms of some of the biggest trends. So I'll probably talk about that in one of the future Q&As when we get into the building stuff. So I'm largely talking about sort of that, perhaps how things look in terms of design trends here. Although it is, to quite a large extent, all influenced by how you've got to build things anyway, particularly around sustainability. Now, and I suppose the biggest influences there are types of building. Modern methods of construction and off-site stuff and modular are being pushed and promoted a lot for all sorts of reasons. We'll talk about those in future episodes. But that does affect the way things look on the outside as well. And I've got to say, it's one of the things I personally actually don't like about a lot of modular and MMC stuff is you can tell that that's what it is. And some of it, when it's not done well, does look very box-like. It's a bit light on detail. It's not always brilliant. Yeah. So I suppose, so what some of the biggest design trends I'm seeing in property development right now is, you know, things looking differently because they're constructed different, and not always the best in my opinion. That's probably on the sort of downside. On the upside, let's say, because of changes in legislation and planning policy, particularly some of the stuff around building with beauty and design codes and things like that, it is hopefully pushing developers to be much more considerate in terms of what they do and what stuff looks like, because no one wants, I don't believe, well, no one sensible wants horrible development and things that don't look nice, right? So as a general rule, well, it's interesting actually. I'm jumping about a little bit here. People will obviously, I bang on a lot about SME developers and house builders, basically the smaller guys and girls that really need to be supported and grown in the industry. I actually think they are the ones that are really the most on it when it comes to design and wanting to do good stuff. Partly because I suppose they're typically working on more smaller, niche sites where well, I mean, it's important everywhere, but it's probably even more important on those sites because you're trying much harder to get things to fit in. Now, conversely, you go to the opposite end of the scale where perhaps you've got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 500 unit typical volume house builder site, when those people are going to be using their standard house types most of the time. They don't really want to bespoke or change things about too much because it's just complicated and more costly at some of the time for them. So, you know, that stuff tends to still not change as much and look a bit more standard. But of course, there are developers, bigger ones included, doing good stuff. Everyone's trying to up their game. So there's definitely some that are a lot better than others. Interestingly, people have heard me talk about Barratt's before. You know, I used to work for Barratt's 20 plus years ago when, to be quite honest, they weren't brilliant. Now, actually, in my opinion, Barratt's are one of the better volume house builders. They do sometimes some all right stuff. Taylor Wimpey that merged Taylor Woodrow and Wimpey many years ago. Before that, Wimpy bought out Langholm's, one of my old firms, that also did really, really good stuff. So I think, Taylor Wimpey are pretty on it for a volume house builder with some, landscaping, placemaking, trying to do some good stuff. So not all the volume house builders are, do poor stuff. There are some that do. Do you know what? Persimmon. Why do I not just fucking name and shame the shit ones, right? Persimmon, not good. Everything that's bad about property development and house building, in my opinion. Whether I can get sued for that, I don't know, but I don't care. So volume house builders, good ones and not so good ones. Smaller developers, now that is where there is really massive opportunity to push the envelope and create much better bespoke, well-designed stuff. And a lot of them are doing it. One of the reasons that part of the industry really needs growing and supporting. Next question, how do you balance creativity with functionality in your properties? Okay, so that's another interesting one. Well, look, ultimately, we've got to start as developers with functionality. Sites, buildings, houses, flats need to be the right shape and size for the market. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we've got to sell things or rent things, so they've got to be right for the market, and they've also got to be right for people to live in. They've got to be nice living conditions, so people are happy and want to buy them or rent them. So a lot of that is about internal layouts. So I suppose that's sort of where the functionality bit comes in. In terms of creativity, look, houses and flats have been built the way they have for many, many, many years because people have worked out what works and what doesn't work. So whilst creativity is great and we want to be pushing the envelope and doing things in better ways, one of the biggest mistakes actually I see people that don't know what they're doing do is like get into creativity and do all sorts of weird stuff just for the sake of it. The problem with that is it's hard to build, it's more expensive to build, it can make things less viable, which actually means you don't get deals off the ground at all because you make them too expensive before you've even started. Or worse of all, less experienced developers do stuff like that and then discover halfway through that it's too expensive, and then they panic and start dumbing things down and you get really horrible stuff. Or worse of all, from their point of view, things can't be funded anymore, they run out of money, they can't sell them, they go bust, and they join the long list of failed smaller house builders and developers. So whilst creativity is important and we really got to be trying to do things in a better way, as always, it's a balance really. So final one here, someone sent in, how do you see technology impacting the future of property design? So we've sort of touched upon that already, really. So the technology that really will and should impact the design is a technology around getting things built quickly, efficiently, economically, and a really high performing, sustainable way. So we've already talked about various methods of modern manufacture, off-site construction, modular and things like that. So better performing buildings are being created all of the time, and that does impact how things look. We're building things in a different way. They're going to look different to stuff that we've done in the past. So the real skill and balance there, though, is building better, but in a way that sort of still looks good and ideally looks better as well. So technology will continue to impact the future of property design to some extent as things continue to hopefully improve. So that's, I think, about it on design. So been sort of like jumping about a bit all over the place. We've had some really good architects on the show, and we've got loads more in the pipeline that, you know, clearly know this stuff inside out and probably going to give you much better answers than me, because at the end of the day, of course, you know, I'm not an architect, I'm a designer, but I do really like architecture and design. And just on that, interestingly, one of the things I have come to realise over the years is that I think the best really good developers, in my opinion, you know, they are super knowledgeable, they are super detailed, they want to do good stuff, they want to create things in the right way, and they are really into architecture and design. And I actually think in their sort of heart of hearts, a lot of developers really, they sort of want to be architects really, because they just want to get good stuff built. Yeah, and interestingly as well, I've also discovered lots of architects in a weird way end up wanting to be developers, because they have really good ideas. They got, you know, they're massively creative, of course. There's great stuff that they want to do, but very often their ideas never actually get off of the drawing board, because they don't know how to get deals done. They don't know all of the other stuff about planning and negotiation and land and stuff like that. So, you know, they very often end up getting frustrated because their stuff doesn't get built. So weirdly, best developers, I think, you know, sort of quite like to be architects sometimes. Best architects would actually quite like to be developers, because that's how they get their stuff created. And the really good thing is when, you know, good developers and good architects collaborate and work together to get stuff to happen, which ultimately in this whole industry is what I think it really needs to be all about, is basically everyone collaborating. What do you think that many developers are missing when it comes to planning? So now obviously when it comes to property development, there's a whole range of developers, from people just starting out to, you know, the biggest developers in the country that are very experienced. But most people, other than the very experienced, tend to misunderstand things, not do things the best way, and therefore not get the best results. Now, having said that, things are really difficult at the moment, but more difficult than they've ever been, certainly in my career. So, you know, it's not easy, even when you do know what you're doing. But when you don't know what you're doing and you do things the wrong way, then you really are asking for trouble. So the thing that most developers, I think, sort of miss or perhaps don't quite understand is that, you know, hopefully, you know, we should be working in collaboration with local authorities, planning departments. Yeah. Now, I know that's hard to do, and it doesn't seem like that's the way it is a lot of the time, largely because, you know, local authorities are under massive pressure themselves and are severely under-resourced. So getting anything done, you know, and getting responses, and it's really important for us obviously to get quick responses, because at the end of the day, time is money. We have agreements with landowners that typically are only for a certain period of time. Those agreements run out and then you haven't got a deal anymore. So we as developers end up under massive time and financial pressure, of course, because submitting planning applications is not a cheap thing. So, you know, the whole way things tend to end up is a little bit confrontational. Yeah, because we're under massive pressure as developers. Local authority planning officers are also actually under massive pressure because there's not enough of them and they're overworked. So you know, a lot of developers, I think, certainly I used to miss that point and just get focused on the fact that, you know, I'm running out of time, I'm running out of money. If I don't get this permission thing, it's going to cost me a fortune. So, you know, it's easy to forget the fact that we really should be trying to work together to collaborate. And as I said, I appreciate that isn't always easy, because sometimes, you know, you don't get, you know, local authorities either can't or won't or don't want to collaborate. Quite often that might be because they come under pressure from people locally that don't want any development, and of course planning officers come under pressure from their own planning committees that might end up not really wanting any development because they're under pressure from the electorate. So it's a real tricky situation. So I think one of the things that many developers miss is just how difficult it is actually for the planning department as well as it is for us. So that sort of leads me onto some of the next questions, really, including what's your number one piece of advice when it comes to getting planning approved? And the answer to that is we need to make things as easy as humanly possible for local authority planners and for planning departments. And the way we do that is to effectively, as far as possible, do their job for them. So, and the way we do that, we need to understand planning and planning policy inside out. As a really skilled, successful developer, we need to know that stuff ourselves, but we also need to work with the very best professional teams. So that obviously means planning consultants and, of course, architects. But even so, the very best developers, they know this stuff themselves, because you can't be reliant as a developer just on your architect or planning consultant, because there's a lot of competing things that have to be considered: finance, build, landowners, land values. As I've mentioned before and we've discussed previously. So ultimately, we as a developer need to know this stuff, but we do need the very, very best professional teams. And then what needs to happen in conjunction with your professional team, when you're putting together a scheme, you need to analyse all of the site constraints, the technical constraints, the legal constraints, and of course the planning constraints and the planning policies inside out, and then reverse engineer what needs to happen and what needs to be designed in order to tick all of those boxes. Okay, and then when we submit our planning applications, basically, any and every single thing that may get raised as an issue or an objection, we need to deal with that up front at the planning application stage. That way, we are making things as quick and as easy as they could be for us by addressing things before they potentially become problems at a later date. And now what we're also doing there, of course, when we do things that way, is we're making the planners' jobs easy, because remember, we all know that they are under serious pressure because they've got too much to do as well. We're making their jobs as easy as humanly possible by we're effectively doing their job for them, answering all of the questions that are going to be asked of them at various stages. Are questions asked by other people that live locally, and of course asked by the planning committees that they're effectively, answerable to. So any and every question that's going to be asked by anyone, we need to address at the planning application stage, so it doesn't become a big problem that we have to deal with at the last minute. Now, obviously, that is not easy, but it is the way to do it. The alternative is, you don't deal with things properly, you don't address them properly, and then it becomes a big problem further down the line anyway, and then ends up actually costing everyone more time, money, and grief. So this stuff's all got to be dealt with anyway. You might as well deal with it properly right at the very beginning. That is the key to getting planning approved. So I say not always easy, but that is the answer. Okay, which leads me on to the next question, like in terms of how do you deal with that? So the question here is like, how come there are so many conflicting policies? So, well, the answer to that, well, let's break this down a little bit more. So obviously you've got planning policy. Well, you've got local planning policy. So you've got the development plan of the local authority that you're dealing with, and then of course you've got central government policy, law, legislation, and the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework. And then of course you get decisions being made. So you end up with case law. So so it can be very difficult to know, well, actually, what is it that I should be following? Yeah. Now, to a large extent, that's where your professionals come in handy, particularly, obviously planners and even planning counsel barristers when things start getting a little bit bigger and more complicated. Yeah. But I suppose the main reason there are so many conflicting policies is because, land planning, development in general is a really big, complex subject. And there are a lot of different things to be addressed. And actually, to a large extent, that is part of the problem. Because as well as, local authorities, then you've got the statutory consultees, you've got the Environment Agency, you've got, Historic England, you've got Highways Agency, you might have a county planning authority in some areas. If you're in London, you'll have the GLA as well as your local borough, wherever you're working. So there's a lot of different people involved as well. And they are very often, they're not talking to each other. It's not really very joined up with those people. They're just looking in their own sort of little boxes about, well, we need this, we need that. And they're not really looking at the bigger picture. It's only really us at the coalface as developers on the front line that have to sort of like juggle everything and work out, well, how can we fit it all together? And again, that's one of the reasons, I wanted to start talking about, well, what really goes on inside property development, because that way, the more all the people involved at various parts of the industry actually understand that and can see things from other people's points of view and how things all fit together, hopefully, the better we can all start working together to get things done, in a quicker, faster, cheaper, smoother, easier way, and get better stuff created as a result, rather than wasting resources fighting about stuff. Yeah. So the reason there are so many conflicting policies is because there just are, right? There's a lot of different people involved that want to sort of, look after their own interests or their own little bit of, areas of expertise that they're dealing with. Now, and then in fact, one of the real skills is for both local authority planners and for us as developers is, how do you balance those conflicting policies and how much weight do you apply to each? Now, and really not easy as a developer, because of course, the answer to that question, which tends to be sometimes subjective, definitely always a little bit of a grey area. It's definitely not black and white. There isn't always, rarely, a definite answer. And ultimately, again, as developers, we need to, I don't want to say gamble, because like personally, I'm not into gambling. I only sort of hopefully make, and as all sensible developers will hopefully make, considered decisions based on a lot of research and analysis. But the bottom line is really, you do not always know. The more knowledge, skill and expertise and a better professional team you've got, the better decisions you will be able to make. But, bottom line is there are a lot of competing things. So that's why property development can be high risk, high reward, because there's just so many unknowns. It's just how it is. What changes does our new government need to make in order to get things through planning more easily? So, obviously a big question, but I'll tell you what I don't think they need to do. So, we all, if you're in any way involved in the industry, will know, well, even if you're not involved in the industry, right, you'll know there's a housing crisis in this country. We haven't been building anywhere near enough houses for many, many, many years. Simple supply and demand. It's one of the reasons things have got increasingly unaffordable. If you're a young person, you're really screwed. You're probably never going to be able to buy anywhere the way things stand at the moment, and in a lot of places you can't even afford to rent somewhere, right? So and the problem's even bigger when it comes to proper affordable housing for the people that are most in need, and definitely couldn't buy or rent anything in the open market. So, there's a real big problem that needs sorting out. At the moment, it looks like the new government are saying lots of the right things. So let's hope things will change. And I'll tell you what I think some of the ways they need to change are. But what I think doesn't need to happen, the system does not need a wholesale sort of re-looking at and replanning. It really doesn't. Because in actual fact, believe it or not, in my opinion, the UK planning system is largely really good in terms of the system and the legislation and how it all works. It's actually, in my opinion, pretty good. And bearing in mind, obviously I'm a developer that has to struggle with it every day of the week, but I still think the system is actually pretty good. It's not so inflexible that there can't be any negotiation, and it's also not so directive or sort of over controlling that stuff just gets pushed through and it happens even if sort of local people don't want it. So I actually think there's a good balance between what needs to happen in terms of housing supply and where it goes and what local people and existing residents want. So the system I actually think is really good. It doesn't need managing. It just needs properly resourcing. Of course, there's stuff that could be changed. I could give you a big, long, detailed list of things that could make it a little bit better. But the most important thing, really, is that it's properly resourced. So there are enough planning officers to actually deal with planning applications, in a professional and timely manner. That's probably number one. And the other thing is that it stays relatively stable for long enough for developers and landowners to sort of make decisions. Because again, as I've mentioned many times, property development is high risk, high reward, and there's enough grey areas anyway. When you never know what the planning policy might be next week, next month, next year, it just massively increases the risk. So, because this business is not a quick thing. Deals tend to be longer term. So it just needs to stay settled, stable, fixed enough for long enough for us to make decisions, work out what we're dealing with, and get on with it. Changing it all the time, talking about changing it, proposing things that never come to fruition, just creates massive uncertainty, which keeps everyone stuck. So the simple answer, or the simplest answer, is really the system needs to be left largely as it is, and stop being tinkered with, and properly resourced. That's the things for starters, just so it's stabilised and developers of all sizes can have an element of certainty. Then we can all hopefully work together and talk about how and where some changes can be made slowly in a proper consulted way. And now finally on that, I think it is worth saying, it's important that the policymakers and government consult with the right people, because ultimately, we all know local people, existing residents, they don't want horrible crap development anywhere near where they live, which is absolutely fine and correct. No one should want horrible crap development anywhere. So it goes without saying that we as developers should be doing good stuff, right? We all know that. There's lots of policy in place now that says we should have to do good stuff. We've got design codes in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act. So every local authority's got to have a design code. So that's good, as long as it's not too prescriptive, because at the end of the day, we need to give good designers and excellent architects the opportunity to consider things properly and do things. At the end of the day, they're experts, right? Good architects know what works and what doesn't work. You don't need a book telling you exactly what you have to do, because that won't always work for every single site. But there's lots of good design stuff proposed. We know we should be all working towards nice buildings and good design. But then separately to that, you need to be listening. Government needs to be listening to the people that are at the coalface, trying to actually make stuff happen. And a big part of that is around actual financial viability. So because it's all well and good, putting policies in place, but are they deliverable? Are they implementable? Or are they actually going to just overall stop development? Because, if you ask for too much of the wrong thing in the wrong place and it becomes financially unviable to provide stuff, we'll actually end up with less housing rather than more. And that's happened a lot of times in the past. So I think consulting with and listening honestly to the people that are actually at the coalface trying to get stuff built is an important thing. So it's not all research by think tanks and there's all sorts of many industry bodies and lobbying for their own sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, you really need to listen to the people at the coalface trying to make things work, who will tell you exactly where the real problems. So that means the house building industry, and in particular smaller house builders that we really need to support and encourage, because they are in my opinion number one thing that's going to get more good quality housing built in this country. So I think that's about it. So key things, really, remember, we've got to collaborate, we've got to listen to each other, we've got to work together in an honest and open way, so that we're all, focusing, going in the same direction rather than fighting each other. We as developers and house builders need to make it easy for the local authority and planners there by giving them all the answers up front and dealing with doing as much of the job as possible for them. But at the same time, of course, they need better training and better resourcing and more people. And that's basically the crux of it, really, in my opinion. Right, just a quick one. Whether you are a massively experienced and well-established property developer already, or maybe you're a new or aspiring one, either way, you will know that it is really not easy to find viable opportunities to come up with the best scheme, the best design that's going to maximise the land value and fully de-risk things for you, and then to go on to get the very best planning permissions as quickly as possible. However experienced you are, you will know that is not an easy thing. I have put together a super detailed scorecard based on my 40 years experience in this industry, reverse engineering everything that I've learned, including lots and lots of mistakes over the years, and everything I've done to maintain, touch wood, 100% planning track record. I'm pretty sure there will be stuff that you don't know. Go and do that scorecard. Find out just how good or not your current process is, and I absolutely guarantee you will learn at least a little something, if not a ton. So it's bit.ly /MLA score, all in capitals. You can do the Millbank Land Academy scorecard. I absolutely guarantee you will find some interesting stuff, and it will help you get much better deals. What's the biggest challenge I faced in the build stage of a project, and how did I get over it? So I've built a lot of stuff over the years, been involved in the building of a lot of stuff. So there's been a lot of challenges, right? Building stuff can be super complicated and tricky, can be relatively simple, but most of the time it's not, depending on what you're doing. So I've had a lot of challenges. There can be a lot of challenges when it comes to building. I'm probably going to talk about this site where we are now. One, it's my most recent, and here we are. But also, it actually has, out of all of my career, been probably the most challenging, actually, out of everything I've ever done. And the reason for that is this. It is a very unusual, non-standard design, and we've actually been building it through one of the most difficult couple of years, certainly I've ever known. And even when I talk to people that are sort of much older and more experienced than me, they also tell me that the last couple of years has been super, super tricky. Main reason being the procurement issues to do with the availability and cost of materials, driven by all sorts of things, including Brexit, ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal, the war in the Ukraine, and a whole load of other stuff has made things, build costs basically gone bonkers over the last couple of years. They've stabilised now, which is good, but completely throughout the construction of this project, it's been really, really difficult. So that's been a biggest challenge. I mean, if and when that ever happens to you, that's always going to be a big challenge. And it's been exacerbated here because we've got such an unusual design, which we had to have in order to get planning. Now, if you watch any other episodes when I've actually talked about this site where we are now, it had a 35-year history of planning refusals, and it was going to take something quite exceptional if planning was ever to be won on this site. So we came up with something quite exceptional, did eventually win planning at appeal. It's all finished now, super sustainable, net zero, looking great, I think, but it was really not quick, cheap or easy to build because it was such an unusual design. So, challenges on this one were, let me jump back a bit, just as a little example. Now, I was at a NHBC, National House Building Council conference, about a year ago now, actually, where the guys there were sort of looking at all of the biggest issues around construction, because obviously, they're warranty providers. They want to make sure everything goes right and people do things in the best, most efficient way. And one of the things they were talking about are the things that you should try to avoid at all costs. And there was a big long list of about 10 things, and effectively we had them all here on this site. And some of those things are, non-standard materials, non-standard details, lots of different funny angles, lots of weird junction details and connections. Basically, all complicated, tricky, and therefore expensive stuff to deal with, which unfortunately I had on this build just because that was the only design that was ever going to win planning. Yeah, so that in itself created a whole load of challenges, coupled with the fact that, as I mentioned, we had the biggest build cost increases we've ever had since the Second World War. Depending on what data and statistics you look at, things have gone up between 30 and 40% over the last 2 or 3 years. Stabilised now, but nevertheless, it's been a big problem. So that in itself created a big challenge. On this one, we had £250,000 worth of Japanese knotweed that needed to be disposed of properly. Some ton of demolition to deal with. It was a very constrained site. We had no direct or easy access to drainage. We needed piled foundations. The site doesn't drain at all. It's on a bit of a slope. So lots and lots of things that cause problems. And on top of that, this one here was a JV with the landowner. And as a result, we were sort of driven to try to get in and out and get these things built and sold ASAP, partly because of the landowner's circumstances. So what that meant is we couldn't really hang around to get the 100% detailed design complete before we started, which can be dangerous. In an ideal world, you wouldn't be building anything until it's fully designed, and you can cost, price, tender, everything before you even start. One of the reasons lots of major house builders have their standard house types, so they know exactly what they're building before they start. Now we couldn't do that here because of the time pressures we were under, which basically meant we had to start. Not ideal, but it wasn't the end of the world. We'd done it all okay, but it just put me and my team under massive pressure because it's just not the best way. But site and vendor circumstances here meant that we had to do that. So tricky build, I suppose, because it was non-standard, exacerbated by the fact that it was through really strange times when build costs were rising super quickly. And on top of that, a lot of material just wasn't available. So basically what that meant is we had to do quite a lot of value engineering throughout the process to find different ways to do things, because stuff, the ways we planned to do it, you just couldn't do it because you couldn't get the gear. So, now if you weren't very experienced, and you sort of couldn't perhaps see ahead and find no other ways of doing stuff, that could have been like a real killer. It was a problem anyway. It wasn't ideal. Build costs went up big time on this one. If we weren't, if we were less experienced, they could have gone up, 3 times more than they actually did. So anyway, that's one of the biggest challenges I faced at the build stage. What could we do to combat the rising costs of materials so that we can actually make money in house builds? Well, have fixed designs as early as possible, really, and I suppose also designing alternatives so if something becomes unavailable material-wise, you can quickly perhaps swap something in and do things in a slightly different way. It's what we had to do here. Luckily enough, it seems that build costs have stabilised. But to be quite honest, combating rising build costs, sometimes there's just not a lot you can do about it. Now, I probably won't go on this one into a whole load of details about different contract types and ways of building things, but I'm sure there'll be some people out there that will say, well, you could have a fixed price contract, and by all means, actually, any people have got things to say on this, please do comment, because it's how we all learn. But people will talk about fixed price contracts, which in theory are good, because at the end of the day we all want certainty. But in order to have a real solid fixed price contract, you do need to have a detailed design that itself is fixed and is not going to change. Because of course what happens the second you start trying to change things, or you discover stuff that you didn't know about, then you've opened the door to it no longer being fixed, and that's what happens a lot. So to have a real 100% genuinely fixed price contract that doesn't ever go up above what you thought it was going to be is tricky. And now, interestingly, let's take the last couple of years for example. There are builders and developers that thought they had fixed price contracts with contractors. But of course, if material prices and labour to a slightly lesser extent, but have gone up 30 or 40% over the last couple of years. Now, to try to force a contractor to stick to that original price when they can't no any longer actually even do it for that price, let alone make any money, they very well may give up and go bust. And a lot of contractors have gone bust over the last couple of years. So, so what happens then? You thought you had a fixed price contract. You try to force a contractor to stick to that price. They can't stick to that price. Therefore, they give up or go bust. And then you're in the worst possible situation whereby you've still got to find someone else to finish it and build it. And they're obviously going to only price it at the rate cost. And on top of that, you've actually got the worst of all worlds, because when someone's coming along trying to pick up, and follow on from someone else's work, you don't know what you're dealing. I mean, it's just an absolute nightmare. So, and that has happened a fair bit over the last couple of years. So, combating rising build costs is really tricky, and it's important for people to understand that, because I'm sort of largely talking to here, but actually for all part of this podcast is about cluing up other people in the industry. So, planners, planning committees, landowners, everyone else needs to understand this as well, just how risky it is, because, like say, property development is not some easy get rich quick thing where it always goes the right way. Very often it goes the wrong way. And it's one of the reasons, we haven't got many SME developers and house builders left anymore, is just because it's so risky. Managing costs is a big part of that. So really, really difficult to manage, even when you know how. A lot of it out your hands. Okay, which sort of leads me on quite nicely to the next one. What would I say is the best way for developers and builders to de-risk their projects, given that there is so much risk? So, personally, I think the best way to de-risk a project is to add as much value as possible before you've even started. So that's why, for many years now, my whole model of my business has been to find 100% off-market development opportunities, and then, hopefully negotiate and secure them on sensible terms, and then add maximum planning value to them. So you've actually created some sort of planning profit in the deal before you've even started. And that sort of becomes a bit of a buffer and effectively an insurance policy, so that, if things do go a bit wrong, things take longer, prices go up when you do build, at least you've got a bit of a buffer to start with. Now, conversely, if you're buying sites that already have planning permission, there almost certainly will be competition for those sites. You can't really have a 100% off-market site that's got planning permission because it's in the public domain and people are going to know about it. So most of the time you've got a site with planning. People really need sites with planning. We all want to keep building and, create more housing, amongst other things. When you get sites with planning, various builders and developers are looking at them. They really want to buy them. So, of course, they're bidding the price up. And as they're bidding their price up, they're bidding their profit margin away. So basically what that means is they end up becoming risky deals. Yeah. Now, they're much more susceptible to things going wrong if and when costs go up, because your margins have been squeezed before you've even started. So that's why, personally, I never, ever buy sites with planning, because it's just way too risky. Having said that, if you don't know how to find off-market sites yourself and add maximum planning value, that's all you're really left to. But assuming that is the case, so right, you've bought a site with planning, you've got a site with planning. Then the way you need to manage your risk is by analysing all of the constraints, researching all of the constraints before you've even started. So you know exactly what the ground conditions are, you know exactly what's under the ground, you know exactly what's surrounding the site, you know where all of your services are, you know the exact cost and need or not for diversions, connections. Basically, super detailed research on the proper cost of everything, and then factoring that in to a super detailed design, working with good consultants, so you can effectively value engineer things to work out, okay, well, what is the quickest, cheapest, most efficient way to build things? And quickest, cheapest, most efficient, by the way, does not mean doing cheap rubbish. This is all within the realms of actually creating high quality stuff at the same time. So again, not a tricky, not an easy circle to square, but I suppose that's what you need to do. So short answer in terms of how you de-risk projects. Well, you de-risk them by adding maximum planning value yourself, if you can, or at the very least, making sure you have properly analysed and assessed and costed the best way to do things, and the way to get around all of the constraints. And on development sites, there are many potential costs and unknowns. You need to know about those things before you start and factor them into the design and the build. So, final little question here. what are the main challenges when it comes to building sustainably, right? So, well, look, there is a big push, quite rightly, for us to all build more sustainably. And I suppose, the biggest challenge around that actually really is to do with cost. Yeah. Now, as a general rule, let's take this one again here. These houses are fully net zero, EPC A-rated, super sustainable. They're not quite passive house standard, but they're not far off in terms of their air tightness and things like that. So, as a result, they were not cheap to build. I'm hoping that the market will appreciate that, and therefore we'll get a little bit of a premium. But of course, nevertheless, it is and was the right way to do things. But the main challenge is when it comes to building, the more sustainably you build, at the moment, unfortunately, it does tend to be a little bit more expensive. Hopefully that will change as meeting new requirements, recent improvements to the building regs, the forthcoming future home standard. Once all of this stuff becomes a little bit more normalised and everyone knows exactly what it is and what they're doing, we'll all get better at finding more, cost efficient ways to do this stuff. But actually, at the moment, like for like, you're building an EPC A-rated house is going to be more expensive than building an EPC C-rated house. So cost really is the biggest challenge when it comes to building sustainable, and I suppose to some extent knowledge as well, because people are a lot of people are used to doing things the old-fashioned way. Not so many people are that clued up on doing things the new sustainable stuff, the new sustainable way. So anyway, I suppose that's the short answers there. As always, if you've got different views and comments, please do stick them down below if you're here watching on YouTube. If you're listening on the podcast and you've got something interesting to say that we can relay to everyone else out there, or you've got questions for future episodes, then you can also send me a DM on Paul Higgs Official on Instagram. So that's it. Hopefully there's been at least a little bit of interesting stuff there for you. Do like, comment and subscribe here on YouTube if that's where you're watching, because that way we can hopefully build more interest, get more people involved in the conversation. So hopefully all together we can learn and collaborate to get more good quality housing and commercial space created, and together build a better world. So that's it, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for tuning in to Inside Property Development. Please remember to like and subscribe. Do join us every week where we'll be speaking to house builders, developers, experts, planners and everyone involved in trying to get more much needed housing created the right way. We'll learn together how we can collaborate rather than fight, and by working together we can all help create better places, spaces and homes and a much more beautiful world.